So yeah, like I said, really glad to have all of you here. Thank you for making the time. Welcome, welcome. My name's Charlie Wright. I'm Marketing and Communications Manager at School for Social Entrepreneurs. I'm also involved in the Climate Action Working Group. So a couple of years ago, we set up a Climate Action Working Group to steer the organization on our sort of climate action work and make sure it's sort of an integral part of what SSE does. One of those things, one of the first actions was for the organization to declare a climate emergency officially. And since then, that's developed into making sure that I'm pretty sure all our programs have sort of modules on decarbonisation or similar kind of sustainability topics. We've also created programs that are bespokely for organizations who are focused on sustainability. The nature of that group has recently changed because although the group is now meeting less, it's because we have actually made a lot of what the mission of that group is part of the wider organization's mission. So it's been a really interesting journey. I've only been involved with it in the last year, but it feels like we've achieved a lot. Part of it is doing events like this to engage the wider community on environmental sustainability, whether that's inspiring kind of doing your own work or giving tips and practical, useful guides, all of which I think will be part of today. The other things that we are doing, we are still developing different ways of sort of increasing skill around sustainability and decarbonisation. And we soon will be putting out like a survey around what the training we offer. And part of that will be, you can answer questions about what kind of what topics would actually be useful for you in your sort of journeys to creating a positive impact. So do look out for that. I will send it in the follow-up to this webinar. Okay, I'm going to shut up in a moment, but first I'm just going to introduce our speaker today, Trewin Restorick. So Trewin was the founder and CEO of Hubbub UK, which transforms the way environmental messages are communicated by uniting people and organizations as a force for good. Hubbub has twice won Charity of the Year, and Trewin was recognized with a Global Leader of the Year award in 2021. He won the Business Green Lifetime Achievement Award, and in 2022, voted by peers as the most influential person in the UK's recycling and resource sector. Trewin's new venture is Sizzle, which I will also post a link to in the follow-up if anyone's interested. And Sizzle is bringing organizations together to make it easier for people to live greener lifestyles. Trewin, I know you've got some slides. Do you want to try and get those on screen, and I'll stop sharing mine? And then I'll hand over to you.
Is that sharing?
Nope.
That's not good.
Try again? If not, I've got them here if we need to be.
Hang on a second, sorry.
That's okay, no worries. Would you like me to share and you can just tell me to move on to...
I'm just going to have one more go, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do.
Actually, no, you do it.
Okay, give me a sec. Sorry, everyone, bear with us. Now my computer's being funny, which is good. My screen has just crashed. This is really brilliant. Okay.
We did do a run through and it worked perfectly.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Are you all right?
No, I'm having like a huge technical problem now, to be honest.
I'll try again then. Has that worked?
Yes, if you just want to make them full screen.
There we go.
Sorry, thank you everyone for bearing with us. Off you go.
So sorry for that. I hope it gets a bit better from that. So many thanks, so many of you for sort of turning up. And as has been said, so I'm going to talk about community engagement and sustainability. And I just wanted to start with how many times have we heard this message? This was last year, UN climate chief warns humanity has 2 years to save the world. I've lost count of the number of times I've heard how many years we've got left to save the world. Um, and yet, despite these urgent calls from scientists, they seem to get louder and louder and louder. We just don't seem to be making any progress at any substantial level. And yet everything the scientists have told us to expect is starting to happen. So, more extreme weather events. So we've just seen sort of the impact of those horrific hurricanes in the US, more flooding across southern Europe. This last month has been incredible flooding, and wildfires. So, the scientists told us what we could expect. We're now starting to see it. And this is now beginning to have an impact on all of us in our daily lives and communities. So, we will start to see food prices increasing as the whole food supply chain becomes more insecure, and there will be certain food types that will become harder to get and more expensive. So the cost of living of climate will increase due to climate change. We're likely to see more deaths from things like urban heat, which is going to become a growing issue. Obviously, flooding impacts people's lives fairly significantly. We're seeing incredible incidents of deaths from air pollution. And we're creating some sort of global experiments around things like microplastics, which we know are increasingly in our environment and even in our own systems and our own sort of bodies, but we don't really know the implications. So we are now starting to see the reality of what the scientists have told us will happen, but we are seeing incredible inaction. And why is that? Well, obviously there are quite a lot of vested interests that are very keen for things to stay as they are. And, they have a very efficient rule book, which they played, which is first of all, spread confusion and delay and prevarication. And, we saw it with tobacco. We're definitely seeing it with climate change. A lot of people can make a lot of money out of the existing systems. They don't want it to change. They don't want the level of interference that is likely to take place to get some of the legislation we need to address the issues. So, vested interest is very much at play and is really difficult to overcome. And then we're all complicated, aren't we? I love this slide of two guys in America going to their gym, massive staircase in the middle. They're using the escalator, and I think this sort of slide sums up to me, that we're all complicated, that we can be told stuff, that there can be sort of information that we're given and we understand it, but then do we act on it? Have we got the time to act on it? Is it too disruptive for us? Are there other things that are more important? So, we've got sort of dual things going on here. We've got the vested interest saying, oh, we don't want change. And then we've got the complexity of how do you encourage people to shift daily behaviors and daily routines, which is really difficult. So when you're faced with that, you've got a global crisis, which is increasingly unknown, and you've basically got inertia to overcome it. How do you deal with that? And I think this is where communities are so strong. Within your community, you can react to a local need. You can help build resilience within your area. You can probably see immediate benefits. And probably as important, you're taking action and overcoming things like climate anxiety and the feeling that you're powerless. So, community action on its own won't address all these issues. We do need all the different levers in place, but communities are a fantastic place to start. And, it does help us to create all the things on that slide: livable cities, cleaner water, healthier environments, greener jobs, better jobs. I think, this is the strength of community action, and this is why I think everybody on this call today is sort of playing a really important part in this transition across to a more sustainable, more resilient future. But it is difficult. And so what I'm going to go through now are the things that I've learned, mainly through error, but sometimes with a few successes, and how I think communities can really sort of be an active part in this transition. And I think there's a number of sort of things in our armory as community groups that we can use. Not sure that's the right word, but there's a lot of techniques we can use which are really important. And the first one is about how do you encourage people within your community to create change. And I think change happens in a bit like sort of communal singing. So, where you've got communal singing, you've got one or two people who start singing very loudly and usually very off key. And once they've broken the ice and start singing, that then gives the rest of the group or the congregation or whatever we want to call it, the permission to join in as well, and they start singing. And then you'll always get the ones at the back who just mime their way through. And what community leaders are the singers in their community, and they're the ones that give permission for the rest of the group to get involved. And in behavior change, this is called social norming. So, people want to feel that they're part of something, that others are doing it, that they're not the weirdos down the road. So sort of having a sort of social norm approach to an initiative is really important, which is why we need the singers in a community. And once you start singing, it's like, okay, how do we use other techniques to get people involved? And a classic one is nudge. So what nudge is trying to get people to change a behavior by giving them a prompt at the point of which they do it. So this is an example that I had at Hubbub, which was, we discovered that one of the most littered items in a street in London was cigarette butts, mainly dropped by young blokes, mainly when they were drunk. So how do you get a drunk bloke to stop dropping cigarette butts on the floor was the question we asked ourselves. We decided a little sticker wouldn't quite cut it. So we created a voting bin with a yes or no answer. And then we asked lots of questions about sports. So the first one was, who's the best football player in the world? Is it Ronaldo or Messi? At the time, it was definitely Messi. So we stacked the bin so it looked like Ronaldo was winning. Got loads of pictures on or posts on social media saying, what do smokers know about football? It's clearly Messi. We had, I think, 89,000 Facebook likes in a day. And basically what that did was it led us to creating a social enterprise which makes voting bins, which are now sold around the world. But crucially, it actually stopped people dropping cigarette butts on the floor because they use the voting bin. So this is a really simple example of how a nudge technique works. But there's other behavior change techniques you can use. You can use competitions. You can use visualization to show people the impact of all their efforts. You can use games. And so once you've decided you're a singer and you want to create a leadership role in your community, think about the behavior change, the proven behavior change techniques that are out there. There's a lot of academic evidence which can back up these techniques. And the other thing that communities have is an incredible ability to tell authentic and compelling stories. So here's an example of one that I did at Hubbub. So we were very concerned about plastics and the amount of plastics that get into the waterways. So we collected a whole load of plastic bottles from a major sponsored event in London. We took them up to Scotland and we turned them into something called plastic wood. We then gave it to the Queen's boat builder to see whether he could build a boat out of it. Amazingly, he could. So we built a punt, which can hold about 12 people. And then we took children and businesses plastic fishing in London, where they literally use fishing nets to collect plastics from the water. And then we turn those plastics into new boats. So for us, it was a really compelling story. It got onto BBC News 3 or 4 times, got massive shares on social channels. But the story is, plastics in the waterway are shocking, but plastic bottles can be recycled into amazing products. So it was a way to sort of make that connection through the power of a story. And I think, that is something that community groups have in abundance, the ability to tell truly inspiring stories and to get coverage and promotion through doing that. But, and it was interesting, the answer to the questions, communities groups tend to be quite resource strapped, full of amazing people doing incredible things, but finding it really hard to get the resources and the reach to achieve sort of transformational change. And I think this is where communities can also play a role in being catalysts for what I call radical collaboration, because there are a growing number of people who do sort of support this transition to a more sustainable future. And they can be local authorities, they can be academics, they can be startup businesses, and they can be big corporates. And I think the secret for a community organization is to try and bring together sort of unusual suspects in a form of collaboration around a joint aim, and use the different skills and resources that those groups have to deliver sort of great change. And I think that is one of the things that I think is really important for community groups to think about, is how can they create that level of collaboration that delivers significant change. And one example of this is a campaign that I developed at Hubbub called Community Fridges. So community fridges are basically a place where food that would have been wasted, which needs to be kept chilled or refrigerated, can be stored, and then it can be taken by anybody from the community. So it's not like a food bank in that it's open to all. And people in the area, if they had a glut of vegetables, if they were growing, they could put them into the community fridge or freezers, and then anybody can take them. And the idea, I stole the idea from Spain, where they worked incredibly successfully. I was told in no uncertain terms that it just wouldn't work in the UK, that it would be trash, that people would abuse the system. So I thought, well, let's fail fast then and fail cheap. So we set up one fridge, which I persuaded Sainsbury's to fund in a small town in Derbyshire called Swadlincote. It worked really well. And then the same cynic said, oh, well, it would work there because it's a lovely community. It won't work in the heart of London where there's might be a lot more social pressures. So we did it in London. It worked even better. And Sainsbury's backed that. And basically what we did was we proved the concept. We proved it really cheaply, and we did it really fast. And as soon as we did that, then that gave me scope to go out and promote the idea to other big retailers, both to get them to contribute product, but also to contribute financially. So I think at the latest count, there are about 330 community fridges. The co-op have put in several £1 million into helping develop the concept. They advertised it live on national television during Coronation Street at Christmas. So they really got behind the idea. So I think if you can find a gem of an idea, test it as fast as you can, as cheaply as you can, and then prove the concept, that is a really great way to start to get other big corporates behind you and create something that delivers something at scale. I think it's also really important to have multiple benefits. So you might be doing what you're doing for environmental reasons, but you should ask yourself, is that the message that will resonate most with the people in your locality, or are there other ways of getting the message across? And then you deliver an environmental benefit almost off the back of it. So my example of this was during COVID. We saw that lots and lots of people can get access to the internet. And obviously during COVID, that restricted you from talking to your friends, to talking to doctors, searching for jobs. You know, it's a massive social barrier during COVID. And yet people have loads of mobile phones sitting in their desks. Companies have lots hanging around. So we went to O2 at the time, they're now Virgin Media O2, and said, can we work with you to take these phones, collect them back, and then we'll clean them sort of physically and digitally. And then will you give us free data that we can then give them back to the community? We managed to persuade them to do it because, you know, why wouldn't they? And we then partnered with lots and lots of local charities to redistribute the phones to the people who needed it most. So it was called Community Calling. Again, it's a scheme that's expanded and expanded again. It's had multi-million-pound investment now from Virgin Media O2, and it's sort of become a norm in terms of there's now a digital bank where you can have access to free data if you're in sort of difficult circumstances. So, but it was sold on the social element, even though from a Hubbub perspective, it was all about electronic waste. So think about stuff that you can do which delivers multiple benefits. can you make it as easy as possible? So this is in Leeds. We knew that a lot of companies were struggling with promoting recycling on the high street. We eat and drink more and more on the go. The infrastructure for recycling collections is almost non-existent on the go. So we managed to go to, I think it was 27 companies in the end, and we said, give us £10,000 each to do an experiment. So we had £270,000. And somehow we managed to persuade Leeds City Council to let us play in their city and try and set up lots and lots of collection schemes, which we measured to see what the impact was. So the campaign was called Leeds by Example. We did some quirky bins. This one blows bubbles at you, but we also did a lot of really thoughtful infrastructure in the city. And crucially, we used quite a bit of money to have an evaluation agency to measure impact. So we could go back to the local authority, the local recycling companies and the investors, the retailers mainly, and say, look, this didn't work, but this really worked. And this scheme has now sort of spawned lots of replicas across different cities because they could cherry pick the bits that they knew would work. But the reason it did work was it was incredibly easy for residents in Leeds to use the recycling facilities that we created. So making it convenient is super important. And then giving them a really good option for an alternative. So as was mentioned by Charlie at the start, I've set up a new organization, mainly because I'm unemployable. So the only way I can get work is by creating stuff myself. And this, one of the things we're doing is looking at how you stop using peat, which is an incredibly important carbon sink in horticulture and growing. And we realized that actually one of the issues is that getting peat alternatives, although they exist, they're not very good. So we've been working with some real specialists to create a peat alternative, which has been performing fabulously in trials in the Northeast. So we're now going to create a social enterprise. We're getting investment together at the moment to go and create a really truly sustainable alternative to peat. And I think this is one of the things that, again, community groups can do. They can be quite sort of creative in the approach they take, and they can look to bring together people, again, through this radical collaboration approach, to try other ways and provide other services locally. And it can be any sort of service. It doesn't have to be a product. It can actually be something that helps people, just makes their life easier to become more sustainable. And then because we are who we are, the importance of incentives becomes really important. So going back to my fail fast, fail cheap, we know disposable coffee cups are a real issue. They can't be recycled. We know that it's a bit of an Achilles heel for the retailers. They know they're under a lot of pressure and they potentially, need to act on it. And yet we also know that despite financial incentives, only about 5% of people take a returnable cup with them to the coffee shop, even though it's saving about 25p on their coffees. So based on that, I went to Starbucks and said, look, why don't you charge customers 5p extra if they use a disposable cup? So basically there was a 30p incentive to have a reusable cup. And why don't you give the 5p that is the customer's money to Hubbub, and we'll create a whole range of new sustainability initiatives with that money. So they did it in 20 stores in London. Reusable cup take-up rates immediately doubled, so it hit an environmental impact straight away. Customer sales didn't go down at all. The perception of Starbucks in that area went up. And overall they deemed it a success, so much so that they expanded it nationwide. So those 5p's generate sort of £3 million a year, I think now it is, for Hubbub. So that's a brilliant income for that charity, so they can do sustainable cups, sustainable projects. Reusable cups has gone up, and now Starbucks is expanding this scheme across Europe. So I think it's already in Germany and the Nordic countries. So then again, there's an example of like, how do you think about, taking a challenge to a company and sort of turning it on its head, but also trying to use it to drive revenue back into your organization and provide an incentive for people to do the right thing. And then the final thing I think is really important is just to be continually innovative. And again, this is where community groups, you can do stuff as a community group that you would never be able to get away with as a big company. You can take risks, you can be cheeky, you can really push the barriers a bit. So this is a campaign we ran called The Air We Share, highlighting poor air quality in London. And what we did was we worked with a university and we put air quality monitors on, it was 20 individuals, so that they could see the impact on the day of their routines and when they were most exposed to poor air quality. And it showed that, if they changed their route when they were walking their kids to school, that they got less exposure to poor air quality. So there were simple things that they could do. But we also wanted to highlight an issue which I think is massive, but which the public don't really understand in any great depth, which is the impact of poor air quality on your health. So this was in Covent Garden, and we worked with a brilliant startup company to create these balloons. So what you can't see is you can see which area you live in, and you could push a button for that area, and it will tell you the air quality in your area. So it was a way of trying to sort of highlight poor air quality, but getting the message across about the air we share. And then we did another scheme where we partnered with an amazing technology company who had drones, and we flew the drones over the beaches in Brighton to measure or to photograph the littering in the area, so we could see exactly what was littered, which company, where it was littered, at what time. We persuaded McDonald's to fund that, and basically what we could do with that technology was to help the local authority communicate better with the companies, put the bins in the right place, work out when they were going to do their cleaning routines, etc., etc. So again, it's a role that a community group can play by going and finding unusual answers to existing problems and doing something really innovative. And particularly now with AI and new tech sort of coming through all the time, there's a lot of tech companies that are looking to prove what they do, and a community group is a good place to do it. And corporates are actually quite receptive if you go to them with something which is a novel approach to an existing problem. So that was my whistle stop tour. I think it was just over 20 minutes. Sorry, Charlie. But I hope you found it useful, and there was some things in there that sort of sparked a chord with you, and sort of encourage you to get re-energized and go out and do some more amazing things in your communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Trewin. No need to apologize at all. I think we could all happily have listened to you talk for much longer, to be honest. We've got some great questions coming in. So anyone who has a question on their mind, please do use the Q&A, and I will try and get to all of them, but we might not be able to do all, although we're looking okay for time. So the first one we have at the top here, Trewin, is so actually this is a great one because it kind of relates to the sort of question we had up at the beginning about partnerships. And there was a lot of interest in partnerships. And Audrey asks, how do you convince your first few clients or collaborators to invest when you haven't maybe got that proven track record?
Yeah, I mean, the first one is the hardest. It's really difficult, the first one. So at Hubbub, I basically raided my address book to see who I knew in the corporate world, which wasn't many people, to be honest, but there was one or two. And then I called them, and I had a chat about what the struggles were they were facing, what they were looking to do. And one of my contacts was at IKEA, and IKEA had quite a lot of sort of sustainable products, which they deemed them sustainable, which weren't selling. And so it's like, how do we encourage our customers to go, and if they're going to buy something, buy the more sustainable choice? And basically what I did was I worked for free for 3 or 4 months for IKEA, which sounds stupid. And basically kept talking to them, and kept coming up with solutions, ideas, and one of them they actually liked, and I said, well, let's go and try and do it in the store. And they did it, and it worked really well, and then they expanded it. And I think they're a bit sheep-like corporates. If you get one and they're a known company, others will follow. And when I ask corporates why, it's because the world of community groups is a complete mystery to them. You know, you could be the best community group in the world, you could be the worst. They wouldn't have a clue. So the way that they sort of justify deciding who to support is, well, if somebody else has done it, they may be all right. And I don't want to go on too long, but another technique I've used, which has worked really well, is you've probably got a local MP who loves what you do, even if they don't know it. And local MPs can host rooms at the House of Commons. So what I did when I started Hubbub on, we ran a food waste campaign. So I got a local MP who I knew was really concerned about food waste and say, oh, will you sponsor a room? And they said, oh, of course. And then I wrote to Tesco's, I contacted Tesco's and Sainsbury's and said, oh, you're absolutely amazing at food waste. Why don't you come and talk at the House of Commons about how brilliant you are? And they obviously said yes. So then I immediately sent out an invite to everybody who I wanted saying, come and hear from Tesco's and Sainsbury's. Oh, and Hubbub. And they're like, who's Hubbub? I don't care. But they went to the House of Commons. Tesco's and Sainsbury's were able to brag about what they were doing. And on the back of it can say, oh, you know, we're doing this. And we almost got sort of connected by default to those organizations. And basically that opened up conversations both with Tesco and Sainsbury's because they, you know, were pleased to have been invited, as well as others. So, you know, it's so hard to get your voice heard against the noise of all the other community groups. So, you know, use your contacts and think, you know, can I use my MP? Is there other people I can use to get my story out there other than me banging away about it?
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say about that sort of just, you know, going through your Rolodex or your contacts, because I've been in a few workshops recently where people have been talking about creating these sort of CSR partnerships or impact partnerships with big corporates, and everyone goes, we don't know anyone in that world. And then you sort of encourage them like, okay, go to your board, go to your community, go to everyone you know and have a very specific idea of the kind of person you want to meet, and then ask everyone in your organization or around it, do you know everyone? And people tend to come back and be like, oh, actually, yes, this person did know someone. So, you know, start with what you've got in your network. One of the other questions, there are two questions on this actually, about working with schools, like if you have any experience working with schools on projects and environmental campaigns, or campaigns to reach the local community.
So schools, yeah. So I previously set up a charity called Global Action Plan, and we somehow managed to become Sky's charity partner. So we ran a number of school projects with them. So my experience with schools is secondary schools are incredibly difficult. You know, the curriculum is so tied up. They need a lot of pre-planning and work in advance. You've got to have a really dedicated, experienced curriculum-based team, I think, to work in secondary schools. Also, secondary schools tend not to be quite so good at getting into the local community because you haven't got that whole school gate interaction of parents and carers taking their younger kids to school and chatting to other parents and carers. So there's more of a disconnection, I think. I mean, these are generalities, but there's more disconnection between a secondary school and its community, and they're very hard to get into. Lower schools are much easier, and much more flexibility. You can achieve much more, but they're smaller, so you need to put in a lot of effort. You're so dependent on the keen teacher, and keen teachers are either brilliant and move on or are overworked. So I think one of my big learnings from working with schools is to get a commitment from the school leadership team or whatever they're called through a letter of agreement early on saying, look, we're willing to put in these resources, but you as a school must be willing to do that. And that sort of safeguards you from the teacher disappearing, and the initiative stopping. And it also gives you a slightly wider base of people who know what's going on and can step in if things get awkward or change.
Brilliant, really practical insight there. So I can see, yeah, basically there's some challenges there, but ensuring the sort of security of your project up front really important. Is what I kind of take from that. Um, so another question here from Saskia. You've given some great examples that show there are lots of proven techniques that people can look to replicate. Yet funders are so often focused on supporting innovation. Any insights about how to bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's the perpetual challenge. Everybody wants everything new, don't they? And you're like, yeah, but we know this works. And it's like, yeah, but what's new? Um, I think, I think that's why the Starbucks thing was so good for Hubbard, because it was basically funding which came in as sort of almost core funding. And obviously that's the ideal, because so one of the challenges of running a social enterprise or community group is you feel like you're building a pyramid upside down, is what I think, which is you have a very small base of infrastructure, or it's like core infrastructure, and what you have is projects that get loaded on top, so the pyramid goes wider, and you're always trying to balance those projects on a very narrow base of resource. And yet, if you don't have that narrow base of resource, the projects won't happen. So it depends what your relationship is like with your funder. I think if you go and explain to them in a business sense why continually funding new projects is actually doesn't help you in terms of your long-term development and sustainability and resilience, I think some will listen. So I think that's worth doing. And then you've just got to play the game, which is, how do we turn whatever we've got at the moment into something that looks new but isn't? And I think that's about keeping your eye on the news, keeping your eye on, what's topical out there at the moment. Is there something that you can slightly sort of switch what you're doing so that it looks like it's hitting the latest sort of thing that's topical and will be top of an agenda for somebody?
Brilliant, thank you. And we've got a question here about sort of, have you done any co-design with communities? I'll sort of add to that maybe, do you have any kind of like tips when you're co-designing with communities, things to look out for, and things to kind of lean into?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, and I've got an example where it works, and probably more importantly, an example where it doesn't work. So I think Hubbub, when it got to organizations can get quite arrogant or, a bit cocky. And, Hubbub just won charity of the year again, la, 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 la. And I think it got slightly into that state of mind, which is probably my fault. And so we come up with a great idea, and we go to the community and go, oh, this is a great idea, do you want to help? And the response from some communities, quite rightly, was, well, you're just stealing our intellect and our connections for your own aggrandizement. And I think, that can happen to varying degrees. And I think that's what you avoid. Where it worked really well was, shows how old I am, it was just after the Brexit vote. And my board and I had a long conversation about, well, which were the towns and places that voted for Brexit, and why, and what can you do about it? So we picked on Oldham, and I basically spent, I think, 3 weeks in Oldham, going and talking to religious leaders, community groups, as many people as I could. And again, this is the advantage of being community group based. So you can go and talk and listen without an agenda. You can sort of get to people are less skeptical about why you're there. And what we discovered in Oldham was a whole load of sort of racial tensions, social tensions, and basically that helped us create a scheme which was looking at how do you help some of those more sort of challenged areas to do stuff around sustainability, but actually it was more about community building, and that worked really well. The danger, of that approach takes a lot of effort, and then you have to ask, well, why are we doing it? Is it scalable? Is it fine for us to put so much effort into a very small, intensive, really well-designed community program? Is that our purpose, or is our purpose about taking an idea and scaling it like the community fridges? And there was a tension that I don't think I ever properly addressed at Hubbub. I've changed my mind now. I think it's, I think it's about more longer term systemic change for the organizations I'm working with. But you do need absolutely everybody to do everything they can.
Thank you. Yeah, we appreciate your sort of humility and transparency and acknowledging. I think it's always useful when leaders acknowledge things where they maybe didn't take the right attitude initially or didn't take the kind of right direction. Maybe a quick answer to this one, which is how can we get a community fridge in our community?
I think there's a community fridge. I've left Hubbub now, and I have no further connections because everybody said whatever you do, don't be the bad smell hanging around if you're leaving. So I left it thoroughly. I think there's a community fridge web page, and you just email Hubbub, and I'm sure somebody there will respond brilliantly, hopefully.
I've just found, I think, the page and put it in the chat for anyone that's interested. Thank you for that question, Dr. Ukemi. How are we doing for time? I think we've got time for a few more. This is great. Kevin asks, I don't know this phrase, so hopefully you do, Trewin. Are we in a Pascal's wager situation regarding inertia in response to climate crisis, etc.? Are you aware of what's a Pascal's wager? Do you know what that is?
No, got me on that one.
Okay, Kevin, can you write in the chat what a Pascal's wager is, and we'll come back to that one. Thank you. You've outsmarted us. Nikki asks, how can we best learn about these great ideas happening in other places? I've not heard of any of these, and yet they are brilliant. Some, as you said, Trewin, actually, about talk to community fridges, sometimes copying is a great shortcut, like you do to community fridges.
Yeah, I think cheat and steal is a brilliant strategy. And so I sign up to way too many e-bulletins and stuff. And so every morning I'll just scan what I see. And if something sparks a chord, I'll go and have a deeper look. Because it's amazing what you find. So, I'll just give an example. By doing that, I found an incredible business in Paris, which is sort of collecting up food waste and turning it into a brilliant compost for the local area. But I found that through one of the European environmental portals. And then we went out and had a look. Transpires it wouldn't work in the UK because French legislation's slightly more relaxed than ours. But it's, yeah, I think just being inquisitive is really important, because there are, the community fridges happened in, like I said, the Basque Country and Berlin. And I just thought, yeah, let's try it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Have we got an answer about Pascal's wager? I just tried Googling it, and to be honest. Oh, thank you, Kevin. The idea that you believe in God just in case it exists, so no harm in believing in it in climate change in case it exists. So, are we in a Pascal's wager situation regarding inertia in response to the climate crisis?
So I'm going to try and guess what do we just assume inertia is where we're going to be? Is that the sort of question?
Why don't you answer what you think the question might be?
Well,
and then yeah,
I think inertia is one of the biggest problems we've got. Inertia and vested interest. I mean, there's those two things together, isn't it? And I think there's quite a lot of, well, we're not going to solve it now view, which I think is false, because I think we can solve the problem. I mean, we need to get our act together pretty quickly. But we also need to acknowledge, I mean, the whole save the world thing really pisses me off, to be honest. The world is going to be fine. It's the people, the nature, the biodiversity on it, that's going to struggle. And there are going to be some really significant winners and losers in this. So I think that's where, we need to be honest about what is it we're trying to do. We're not trying to save the world. We're just trying to create a better, more equitable future for all the living things on it. And I think we need to reframe the conversation around that, because if you can go on that line and have a much more positive approach, then the inertia thing gets a little easier to overcome. I'm sorry if that didn't answer the question, but it's the best I got.
Great crack at it. I would struggle to get my head around it, to be honest, when it was under the pressure of being on the spotlight. I'm just gonna do, I think, one more question. I'm sorry if we don't get to everyone's. I'm gonna pick one of the broader ones if possible. Oh, there's two now that I want to ask. Okay, I'm gonna go with this one from Henry. How do you navigate working with, such a wide variety of different local communities when also running a national organization?
So I think the answer to that is to give everything away. So I think it's the exact opposite of intellectual property. And so, okay, another thing that pisses me off, quite a lot of things in life piss me off, is national charities that will say, oh, you can only use our logo if you pay us 50,000. You can only do this if, our logo sits in the bottom right-hand corner, is in our font. I mean, I think that's crap. Why are those organizations there? Supposedly, they're not there for their own good. They're meant to be there for the wider good. And so with community fridges, for example, I actually used an example of a hotel chain. So there's the Continental hotel chain. You go in and it actually allows for the locality of the area to seep through. Whereas the Hilton, if you go to the Hilton, I don't go, they all look the same. That's the corporate model, which is like, it's going to look like a Hilton. You'll get the same experience wherever you go. It's the Hilton experience. The Continental experience is, it depends what the locality is like, and it depends on the area, and it depends on the culture of that area. And so with community fridges, it's like, as long as they operate to a basic set of standards around safety, ambitions, values, I don't care who runs it, what it looks like, as long as the standard is there, then it's up to the people in that locality to interpret that as best as possible for their needs. So so that's the model, which is, and that's why with the community calling, I went to the national charities to say, would you partner with community calling? And they wanted a big fee, and so on, sod it. Let's go to the community groups that have better links, and it's a lot more hard work, but actually you probably get to the people who need it most, and actually you probably have more longevity because it's more owned by the community. So that was the approach I took. It wasn't always liked by the trustees because they always like, well, how are we going to measure impact? How are we going to show that we're of value? And my view was, well, we'll show your value by doing stuff rather than having a nice brochure about it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, as someone who works in marketing communications, it's music to my ears to hear someone just putting down the annoying brand guidelines of I shouldn't say that out loud, actually, should I? But anyway, yes, I spend a lot of my time following brand guidelines. And that seems to be one of the biggest interactions I have with other charities. I'm gonna do one more question. It might be a bit of a biggie, so I'm gonna kind of paraphrase it. Let's say, you've got the community engaged, you've measured that there's a willingness for something to happen in that community, but the central government or maybe even local authority is a blocker. Do you have any kind of experience, advice about those kinds of challenges where you're getting into more of the sort of government policy stuff?
Yeah. Yes and yes. It's a really good question. How am I going to answer it? So I think, and local authorities are actually sometimes the worst because the local politics and local authorities can absolutely be very sticky and thorny and quite often dependent on the views of one or two very vocal councillors, which might not represent the wider thing. So I think it's sort of like be a guerrilla, guerrilla tactics, and is just go and do it and do it on a very small scale as best you can, and prove it works. There's no point trying to fight intractable politicians. I've learned to my cost. You just won't win. So I think, you have to have evidence, and actually what you really need is other people telling them that it works. So it's amazing the difference it has if you have a big retailer saying, "Oh, this works," then it's like you saying it works, even though you probably know better than the retailer. So it's thinking about who your advocates could be. Yeah, asking for forgiveness is definitely better easier than asking for permission. That's the answer I should have given, because that's the truth of the matter.
Yeah, thank you for that comment, Nikki. Trewin, I would love to keep sending these questions your way, but I do have to keep it under time here. So I'm just going to say a massive thank you for sharing so much knowledge and insight today, and so much, honesty and transparency about the way you do things. It's a really amazing resource to hear from you, and I hope everyone else is feeling what I am, which is partly inspired, but also just better informed about how we can kind of make things happen. So huge thank you to you, and a massive thank you to everyone who joined today. I'm really, really pleased to see just how engaged everyone was. The chat has been going off the whole time. Loads of great questions, too many, sadly, to answer all of them. I will be sending out a follow-up with slides, recording, chat transcript, so you can go back and see who was in the chat and things like that. Please do connect with each other. Really great to see loads of people adding their LinkedIn. Connect with Trewin. He's kindly shared his contact details on his slides. Other than that, the only things I'll have to say is just some quick shameless promotion of things that School for Social Entrepreneurs are doing. I will also reach out to people about a climate action program that we will soon be recruiting for. So please check that out if that it sounds interesting to you. And we will, I think I mentioned already, be sending out this survey to understand more about what the sector needs in terms of capacity building and skills. So please do take a few minutes to answer that. I think you get entered in a prize draw for some John Lewis vouchers, which coming up to Christmas will be obviously pretty useful. And I think that's it from me. So just again, massive thank you, Trewin. Thank you to everyone for joining. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. Thank you.